1540 on December 5, 2025. Satellite feeds over the East China Sea lit up as 22 Chinese warships shifted into a tight arc only 54 kilometers from Okinawa, their Type 346B radars locking onto every aircraft departing Kadena Air Base. The formation looked less like a patrol and more like the opening frame of a blockade. Moments later, U.S. reconnaissance detected multiple YJ-18 launch cells opening, signaling China's readiness to escalate. How had a major power decided to squeeze one of the world's busiest maritime corridors in broad daylight? And what would happen when a U.S. carrier strike group refused to turn back? The sudden Chinese naval arc near Okinawa was not an isolated maneuver, but the culmination of months of escalating pressure in the East China Sea. To understand why the 1540 incident on December 5, 2025 mattered so profoundly, one must first understand what a naval blockade represents. It is not merely the physical obstruction of sea lanes. It is a political message delivered through steel hulls, radar beams, and missile tubes. China's deployment included destroyers equipped with Type 052D and Type 055 platforms, both carrying long-range YJ-18 anti-ship missiles and HQ-9B naval interceptors, a combination designed to create a dense anti-access envelope. Supporting vessels, from Type 054A frigates to replenishment ships, maintained a formation that allowed continuous radar coverage over the corridor between Taiwan and Okinawa. Okinawa itself is far more than a strategic island. It hosts Kadena Air Base, the largest U.S. air facility in the Pacific, and White Beach Naval Port, which supports critical logistics for both American and Japanese forces. Any disruption in this region immediately affects maritime trade routes linking Japan, South Korea, and the wider Indo-Pacific. The Chinese maneuver signaled an intention to test not only Japan's resolve, but also Washington's credibility under the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. How had tensions reached the point where warships maneuvered within striking distance of an American ally's coastline? And why did Beijing choose precisely this moment to apply pressure? The answers lie in a shifting balance of power, competing territorial claims, and increasingly assertive military posturing across Northeast Asia. As China pushed surveillance flights deeper into Japan's airspace buffer zones and increased Coast Guard patrols near the Senkaku Islands, its December naval arc became the boldest escalation yet. The question now was whether this show of force would deter U.S. intervention or provoke an immediate response. China's decision to construct a de facto blockade line near Okinawa stemmed from a convergence of technological confidence and evolving naval doctrine. Over the past decade, Beijing's maritime strategy has shifted from coastal defense to blue water power projection, and the December 5th formation displayed the core of its modern concept: layered detection, long-range strike capability, and the ability to control maritime choke points. Central to this posture were the Type 052D and Type 055 destroyers, each equipped with advanced phased array radars capable of tracking dozens of targets at ranges exceeding 300 kilometers. Their YJ-18 cruise missiles, with terminal sprint speeds approaching Mach 3, were designed precisely for scenarios in which China sought to deny U.S. surface combatants access to contested waters. Yet the technological factor alone does not explain the behavior. Beijing had spent years refining a playbook of intimidation without direct confrontation, using naval presence to rewrite the psychological boundaries of regional security. In this instance, the goal was to demonstrate that China could pressure Japan in proximity to a major U.S. base and still maintain escalation control. The blockade arc was shaped deliberately to mimic a lawful patrol, while exercising radar lock-ons that fell just short of an overt act of war. By creating ambiguity, China attempted to seize the initiative and force Washington to either concede operational space or risk being portrayed as the aggressor. But another element lay beneath this display: China's belief that its maturing A2AD infrastructure could neutralize a U.S. carrier group before it approached striking distance. This conviction emboldened commanders to operate closer to Okinawa than ever before. The question, however, remained unavoidable. Could even the most sophisticated Chinese systems withstand a coordinated U.S. response, backed by electronic warfare, advanced surveillance, and decades of carrier-based dominance? Despite its imposing appearance, China's blockade line near Okinawa carried inherent strategic vulnerabilities that Beijing either underestimated or chose to ignore. By positioning major surface combatants within 54 kilometers of Japanese territory, the People's Liberation Army Navy placed itself inside one of the most heavily monitored surveillance zones in the Indo-Pacific. Kadena Air Base's sensor network, coupled with Japan's overlapping coastal radars and U.S. space-based intelligence, created a transparent operational environment in which every Chinese course correction, radar sweep, and missile bay movement was recorded in near real time. Maintaining a blockade under that degree of scrutiny required constant readiness, and constant readiness meant predictable patterns, something adversaries could exploit. More critically, China's forward posture forced its vessels to operate with active radars engaged for extended periods. This was tactically necessary to maintain situational awareness, but it also illuminated the precise frequencies and beam patterns of systems that Beijing typically guards closely. U.S. electronic intelligence aircraft orbiting outside the blockade zone collected reams of data, mapping the performance of China's Type 346B and Type 364 radars with a clarity rarely achievable during peacetime. In attempting to project dominance, China inadvertently exposed core elements of its A2AD structure. There was also a geopolitical flaw. A blockade, even a veiled one, near Okinawa, touched the core of Japan's sovereignty and threatened uninterrupted commercial traffic that supports its export-driven economy. Tokyo could not ignore such a provocation, and Beijing's assumption that Japan would respond cautiously underestimated the political reality in Tokyo, where bipartisan support for stronger defense measures had surged. The blockade therefore risked unifying domestic opinion in ways China sought to avoid. As China tightened its arc, one question grew sharper. Had its commanders misjudged how rapidly the United States and Japan would coordinate to counter a maneuver that crossed multiple diplomatic red lines? To understand why the U.S. carrier strike group ultimately broke through the Chinese naval arc, one must examine the fundamental mismatch between China's anti-access doctrine and America's carrier-centric operational design. China's A2AD network relies on creating layers of overlapping missile threats intended to keep U.S. forces at a distance. Long-range YJ-18 cruise missiles, HQ-9B interceptors, and cooperative targeting from reconnaissance aircraft and shore-based sensors. In theory, these layers could saturate and overwhelm a carrier group attempting to enter contested waters. But the December 5th encounter revealed the limits of this approach when confronted by a fully integrated U.S. response. The American carrier group deployed three critical systems in concert. First, the E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft established a radar horizon that exceeded the detection range of the Chinese destroyers, allowing the U.S. to track the blockade formation before any Chinese sensor identified the carrier's precise position. Second, EA-18G Growlers initiated a complex pattern of electronic warfare, targeting the frequency bands of the Type 346B radar and degrading the coherence of China's tracking picture. What appeared on Chinese screens as stable contacts began fragmenting into inconsistent signatures, forcing their operators to question which returns represented real threats. Finally, the Aegis-equipped cruisers and destroyers escorting the carrier formed a layered shield that could simultaneously track and engage more than 100 incoming objects. This defensive umbrella gave the carrier the freedom to maneuver closer to Okinawa than Chinese planners expected. The combination of electronic distortion, superior battlespace awareness, and robust missile defense reduced the effectiveness of China's anti-access envelope. The event underscored a key lesson. China could challenge a carrier from afar, but sustaining a close-range blockade against a determined U.S. strike group was another matter entirely. The natural question followed: if A2AD could not halt the carrier, what intelligence and political factors compelled Washington to act so decisively? Intelligence and alliance dynamics played a decisive role in Washington's rapid and assertive reaction to the Chinese blockade attempt. Hours before the U.S. carrier group altered course toward Okinawa, American reconnaissance satellites, KH-11 electro-optical platforms, and Lacrosse radar imaging systems had already detected anomalous Chinese ship formations tightening into a semicircular arc. The data revealed not only the number of vessels, but also their weapons readiness posture. Missile hatches warming, fire control radars shifting orientation, and communication packets encrypted at a higher than normal frequency. These indicators suggested China was preparing to enforce its position, not merely demonstrate presence. Simultaneously, Japanese forces contributed critical intelligence. P-3C and P-1 maritime patrol aircraft monitored low-altitude movements that Chinese destroyers attempted to mask behind sea clutter. Coastal radar installations on Okinawa observed repeated narrow-beam radar pings aimed toward Kadena Air Base, confirming that China was willing to probe air operations at a U.S. facility. Tokyo classified the maneuver as a direct threat to its territorial security and invoked urgent bilateral consultations under the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. This diplomatic step left Washington with little ambiguity. Inaction would undermine alliance credibility at a time when regional partners were scrutinizing every move. The U.S. decision to break the blockade was finalized in just 11 minutes after receiving the Consolidated Intelligence Report. The calculus was simple. Allowing China to seal off waters so close to Okinawa would normalize a precedent that could later be applied around Taiwan or the Senkaku Islands. Moreover, any delay risked encouraging other regional actors to test American resolve. By pushing the carrier strike group forward, Washington aimed to reassert control over a critical maritime corridor and demonstrate that coercive tactics would not be tolerated. The question now shifted from causes to consequences. How would the international community interpret China's failed blockade and America's muscular response? The attempted blockade near Okinawa immediately drew comparisons to other high-stakes maritime confrontations around the world. Analysts noted parallels with Russia's efforts to restrict access to the Black Sea during the Ukraine conflict, where the Kremlin used naval assets and missile batteries to influence commercial shipping routes. However, the Russian model relied on geographic choke points and land-based systems, while China attempted something far riskier, projecting a blockade line directly adjacent to a major U.S. military hub, well outside its territorial waters. This distinction underscored how aggressively Beijing was willing to test the limits of regional security norms. Observers also pointed to Iran's periodic attempts to pressure global markets by threatening the Strait of Hormuz. Yet even those actions occurred in waters where Iran traditionally asserted influence. China, by contrast, attempted to alter the status quo in a zone that underpins Japan's economic lifeline. Nearly all of Japan's energy imports and a significant portion of its maritime trade flow through nearby corridors, meaning any interference has immediate economic implications. Global markets reacted quickly. Shipping insurers raised risk levels for East China Sea routes, and energy futures fluctuated on early reports of the standoff. The strategic consequences for China were just as significant. By failing to enforce the blockade once the U.S. carrier strike group advanced, Beijing inadvertently revealed the limitations of its A2AD capabilities at close range. Regional states, particularly South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines, interpreted the incident as evidence that Chinese naval coercion could be countered effectively when alliances were activated. In Tokyo, the political response was swift. Parties that had previously hesitated to support expanded defense budgets now rallied behind proposals to accelerate missile defense modernization and increase joint exercises with the United States. Washington, for its part, capitalized on the moment. The U.S. Navy released declassified imagery of the blockade's trajectory and the carrier's breakthrough, framing it as a demonstration of commitment to open sea lanes and alliance solidarity. The narrative resonated across Southeast Asia, where countries wary of China's maritime expansion viewed the episode as a reminder that Beijing's power, though formidable, was not absolute. The broader question emerged: would China recalibrate its approach after the setback, or would it double down on strategies designed to challenge American influence in critical waterways? The Okinawa blockade attempt exposed vulnerabilities, not only in China's coercive strategy, but also in the broader Indo-Pacific security architecture. The first set of solutions lies in technology. Regional militaries must enhance multi-domain sensing networks capable of detecting fleet movements before they consolidate into coercive formations. Japan has already begun exploring expanded use of over-the-horizon radar and integrated data fusion centers with the United States. For China, the incident underscored that a modern navy cannot rely solely on radar illumination and missile envelopes. It must improve passive detection systems and diversify command and control methods to avoid presenting predictable signatures during high-risk maneuvers. Operationally, the United States and Japan are likely to strengthen their joint response protocols. The December 5th event demonstrated how quickly a misunderstanding or miscalculation could escalate. Establishing rapid consultation channels, pre-designated maritime corridors, and expanded trilateral cooperation with Australia would help ensure that any future standoff is addressed through coordinated deterrence rather than reactive improvisation. For regional partners, building interoperable electronic warfare capabilities will be essential, as the standoff proved that information dominance, not just firepower, defines control of maritime space. Strategically, the future hinges on whether China adjusts its calculations. Doubling down on blockade-style pressure risks alienating neighboring states and accelerating counterbalancing coalitions. A more stable approach would emphasize confidence-building measures, notification protocols, and limited deconfliction agreements that reduce the likelihood of misinterpretation. Yet the broader trajectory remains uncertain. Geopolitical competition is intensifying, and naval forces will continue to shape the Indo-Pacific balance. The central question for the coming decade is therefore clear. Will nations choose escalation through maritime brinkmanship, or will they invest in mechanisms capable of preventing a crisis from igniting a regional conflict? The December 5th blockade attempt near Okinawa demonstrated that modern naval power is defined less by the size of a fleet and more by the political consequences of its movements. China sought to reshape the region's strategic boundaries, but the swift U.S. breakthrough reaffirmed that coercive tactics near key allies carry significant risks. The episode underscored how quickly a miscalculated maneuver can escalate into a test of resolve with global implications. As maritime competition intensifies, understanding these dynamics becomes essential. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe, share your thoughts, and follow the channel for deeper insights into unfolding security challenges.